Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me today is Emily Scott. Emily is running for Virginia Senate, District 1, as a Democrat, right?
That's right.
So, always the question I ask is, why do you want to do this?
I want to do this because I want to represent people who aren't being represented right now. Historically speaking, this area has been represented mostly by Republicans.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who disagree with Republican policies, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done that isn't being done by our current representation. There are only 2 Senate seats between the Democrats and Glenn Youngkin's agenda, and I don't believe the majority of the constituents actually are going to go along with Glenn Youngkin's, what I believe to be far-right extremist policies, and I'd like to help stop that.
All right, we'll expand on that a little bit. Tell me about some of these things that you disagree with.
Well, I disagree with the 15-week abortion ban. That's number one, because I don't believe in abortion legislation. It says one set of rules for men, one set of rules for women. And I don't think that that's right. I do not believe in abortion legislation. I think it should be between a woman and her doctor, period.
Right.
And anything else makes women second-class citizens.
Right. You touched on something there that I think is as a national issue that's come down to the local issue, and that is one set of rules for you and one set of rules for somebody else. And I think people, regardless of the party, wants one set of rules for everybody.
Well, correct.
Yeah.
But the content of those rules, the subject of those rules is fairly important.
Yeah.
And that's, largely speaking, what we disagree about in terms of party.
Sure. So, we have our national issues, and I think most people know where the Democrats stand on a lot of national issues. But let's get it down. You mentioned local. We're somewhere in the middle between national and local, so the state kind of runs right there in the middle, which is important. I mean, it does affect
Correct.
the locals, the way our state government runs. So what are some of the things you think you can do where District 1 really needs some good representation?
I think District 1 needs some real help with Route 11, Route 81. 81's a mess.
Oh.
And it's a state responsibility. A lot of people think that that's national responsibility, but it's nationally funded, but the state needs to do something about it.
Right.
And I have some, what I think to be pretty good ideas on how to deal with that. Also, all of the transportation system in this district could use some help. Route 7's a mess, 50's a mess.
Right.
And a good portion of our population commutes. And, efficient and safe transportation is going to be number 2 on my...
Yeah, it's critical. The transportation is an issue. And I can remember when we moved here in 1974, they were building 495, right? Well, Maryland had already built 4 lanes. Virginia had 2 lanes. And I can remember the question was, why didn't you build 4? Oh, well, we'll wait. We'll do it later.
Right.
And that seems to be Virginia's transportation. We're going to do it later. Kick the can down the road.
Correct. It's sort of reactionary in the sense.
It is, and I heard that about 81. Well, we're going to work on it.
Well, simply widening it isn't necessarily the solution,
No.
because widening it's just going to make more traffic.
Sure.
More people are going to take
Kind of
it.
like I-66. They keep widening it, and it just keeps filling up.
Of course, if you build it, they will come.
Sure, yeah, that's a truism.
But I think that the best solution to it is to run freight rail down parallel to 81. We need to take some of that freight traffic off of 81. And that will ease the traffic in general.
Right.
And if you can encourage freight rail. Now, building a brand new track is going to be kind of tedious, expensive, bureaucratic,
Sure.
but it can be done.
Sure.
And we saw a great response to the Central Corridor, to what they call the Central Crescent. Mm-hmm. We can also divert more freight traffic to the Central Crescent. And I think that should ease some of the traffic problems on 81. Another thing that we can look at is commuter rail. It wouldn't hurt anything to bring commuter rail out to Front Royal. I
Right.
feel that commuter rail is more expensive than freight rail.
Right.
But at the same time, it would pay off in the long run in terms of improving traffic congestion. It would help the environment. There'd be less pollution. And also, people would probably enjoy some public transportation for a change, because gasoline prices go up. They're going to go up.
I was really disappointed when I seen the subway take a turn and go up to Dulles, and instead of coming straight out 66 where the traffic is.
Of course.
Because, they stops there at Vienna. That's not really, wouldn't Gainesville coming out all the way there be really a sweet little deal? I think.
Well, we can see it come out Front Royal. Front Royal would be a great transportation hub. You could actually have commuter buses that go in to the terminal or the end of the rail, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, commuter buses on 81 isn't a bad idea.
No.
And it's certainly something that could be done fairly inexpensively.
All right.
And,
So those are two major projects. So let's get down into what something might really happen in a shorter time. So what are some of the things that you're passionate about?
well, I am passionate about transportation, affordable housing. Housing prices have gotten to be unaffordable for the average person, especially
Right.
in this area. We see a lot of people moving in who don't mind paying higher prices,
Well-
and people's incomes don't necessarily increase
Yeah.
with the rate of.
I see that around here. They sold their house in Arlington that was worth probably $40,000 for $800,000. You know what I mean?
Right. And
They paid for it, 50 years ago, and now they come out here and don't mind spending $600,000-700,000 for a house 10 times bigger.
Right, and of course you come out here, and the average household income is about $37,000.
Right.
And you're not going to be able to afford that same property.
No.
And then it creates some problems, and these things aren't easy answers.
Right.
But we can certainly do stuff in terms of policy to encourage what I call smart development,
Right.
vertical development, as
Right.
opposed to horizontal development.
Yeah.
We also need to think about preserving our farmland,
Right.
preserving our beautiful parklands,
Right.
and simply just haphazard development and responding as it happens isn't going to do it. We need to consider a comprehensive plan that encourages tourism,
Yep.
agricultural interests. We need to balance. We need to balance our development with our agricultural interests.
Right.
It's not
People move out here because it's charming, and then they want to pave it over.
precisely. It's because then they want it to look like the place they just left, which is not. That.
I read a little bit on your website there, which is, tell me real quick.
Oh,
Can you remember
Scott.
it?
Yes,
Scott
of course
for
I can
Senate?
remember.
Is that what it is?
ScottForStateSenate.org.
Right. So I looked on there, and you had lived outside the valley for a few years, and I think that's something that a lot of people here have never left the valley and have not seen other cities and things that have grown up. And sometimes you see things that you don't want, and you see some things that work.
True.
And you need to, and you've come back for quite a while. So I just wanted to mention that sometimes you have to go outside our own little bubble to see other things.
Well, you see what, like as you said, you see what works, what didn't work. I lived in the Detroit area for a long time,
Yeah.
and there's some things in the Detroit region that didn't work out so well for Detroit residents.
Right.
But most of those were local issues, and Detroit has an income tax. The city of Detroit has an income tax, which tends to discourage development in the city of
Sure.
Detroit. So, quite honestly, that could be the number one thing that Detroit should consider doing without.
Right.
And I think that people don't expect Democrats to talk this way, but I think you can build tax incentives into
Right.
things to help your region. It's you don't have to necessarily take the tax money out of business, but you
Right.
have to provide some incentives for them to do well for their employees, for the region. And that goes to climate change issues.
Right.
Let's build some incentives into green energy. We don't have to tax you. We
Right.
can do it the other way around. We can
Right.
give you tax incentives for such things.
Right. You're right. I always say you can't make a horse drink, but you put salt in its oats.
It's an interesting way to put it.
It's the same thing. It's a carrot and a stick type thing. And you're right. When I mentioned that you moved away, I remember I grew up out in Arizona, and I was out there, and they have done horizontal expansion. And the government just keeps extending the water and utilities farther and farther and farther. You can get on one road and drive 150 miles and still be in the metro Phoenix area,
Interesting.
And versus going up, we kind of, maybe we don't have to be like New York City and go up 50 stories, but,
Well, we don't have to be like Northern Virginia.
No.
Vertical development would be a big help.
Right.
But there again, when you live in a place like this, you have to be careful about the skyline. You don't
Sure,
want to
sure.
obstruct people's view of the beautiful countryside because that's where a lot of our revenue comes from. Tourism is our
Right.
number 2 industry.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of tourism for the Shenandoah Valley.
yeah. Well, another thing is the agriculture. We don't realize how much that is in our district here.
Agriculture is the
Yes.
number 1 industry.
Yeah, it's big, and I don't think people realize that.
But it is the major revenue producer. However, most people work doing something else.
Yep.
And so therefore, that's something else that's dear to my heart is repealing the right to work for less laws. I feel that would help a rising tide lifting all boats.
Right.
You give people more money to spend, businesses do better, communities do
It's a
better.
fine line to watch, though, between raising things and then inflation and things get out of hand. So it's got to be controlled, I think, a little bit.
Well, inflation is also voluntary.
Yeah.
Just
it's-
because somebody has more money to spend doesn't mean you get to charge double.
Right.
And quite honestly, that's
That's
not
the
good.
American way, though, isn't it?
It's not good for business, though. It really
No.
isn't good for business
No.
because ultimately you run out of people who can afford your product. And that's quite honestly one of the things that seems to be happening in our country right now is that wages aren't keeping pace with inflation. And one way to help that is to do away with our so-called right-to-work laws, which I call them right to work for less, because a unionized worker has protection. And another thing that our employees don't have, many employees don't have, is health insurance.
Right.
And the only way you can protect a worker's rights and benefits is with a contract. There's nothing wrong with that. Individuals have contracts with businesses. There's nothing wrong with a group of employees having a contract with business. People kind of think, oh, it's unions. But no, it's actually what we call collective bargaining, meaning that you tell us what you want, we tell you what we want, and ideally you come to an agreement. And that's
Works,
what I'm
yeah.
in favor of.
Okay, well, that's good. What else you got? I'm sure you got some more things. We got a couple of minutes
There's
left.
loads of things. Public education. Glenn Youngkin's talking about trying to defund public education. Public education is a wonderful thing. You and I probably wouldn't
Sure.
be here without public education.
Exactly.
We wouldn't have a middle class without public education. And I'm a big believer in it. And I think that in some ways we need to spend more on public education. We've kind of moved away from thinking about who actually benefits from these things. All people think about is the money that they spend.
Right.
They never think of what they're getting for it. And an educated public, there again, is better for everybody.
Sure.
As, you know, if I'm elected to the Senate, I like to think that I'm working in the public interest. We have a responsibility to our constituents to do what our constituents talk about wanting, on the one hand. On the other hand, we also have a responsibility to do what's best for everybody.
Right.
And I don't think we hear people talking about that nearly enough. They keep talking about business, people, but parental rights, blah, blah. All of those things are hugely important. But at the end of the day, the public interest is what counts. That means programs that help everyone, not just you and me.
Right.
And that's why I'm running for office, is to show that, yeah, there's lots of people out there that need stuff that aren't getting represented.
Right.
Not a lot is being done for this area by our current representation.
And one of the things you mentioned on your website was the broadband. I mean, we live in the world of the internet now. You think
Correct.
we're kind of on the short end out here?
Well, I think we're seeing improvements. We're seeing vast improvements. In fact, actually in Warren County, something like 80% of our households are covered by broadband. And also in Shenandoah County, we're seeing great strides.
Right.
So,
I learned something yesterday about our broadband, and that is the fiber that's coming into Front Royal is a hub and is now feeding out to all the fiber, like the Shenandoah County, all coming from Warren County, which I thought was kind of strange, but hey, it's coming. And now we have Shentel with Glow Fiber, and then we have CenturyLink, and we have Xfinity now has all come in with their fiber optics. So you're right, that's a big thing.
there are also benefits. There are ways that low-income households are helped.
Right.
And I think that that's important to make sure that lower-income housing has access to information.
Sure.
And I think that more information, more education, the better. You have
Sure.
responsible citizens. You have people who know what they're doing. And yeah, broadband goes along with public education.
It does.
It's important. Now, that doesn't mean your kid should be doing everything possible on the internet.
No.
But believe that goes to individual responsibility.
Yeah.
And people think the Democrats want to control everybody's lives. No, we don't want to control your life. We want to actually give you the freedom to do what you want, but make the right decisions for your children. And that kind of goes to a local issue here with the Samuels Library.
Right. Hot topic right now.
It is a hot topic, and I can understand how people can get inflamed and upset about individual issues, but basically that's kind of a distraction. I think when you and I were growing up, you couldn't read everything you wanted to in the
Right. No,
library,
no.
but we had people in charge who made smart decisions.
Right.
They had education. They had a background in library science. They knew what was appropriate for certain age groups because they were educated to that effect.
Right.
And you didn't have people who'd never read a book trying to tell people what to do at the library. And I feel that we have to look at these issues and deal with them carefully.
Right.
There again, you do have to balance some. You have to balance.
Right.
You have to, as you pointed out once before, there is a place in the middle, or maybe yet a third solution.
Yeah.
Just because we tend to put political science into left and right doesn't mean that that's always your solution. Sometimes there's something else again.
Exactly.
And actually, parents have some degree of responsibility for deciding what their children are going to read.
Right.
But the best way to help them do that is education.
Right.
That would be my.
Can't go wrong with that, can you?
No, you can't go wrong with education.
Well, Emily, good luck on your campaign, and hopefully we'll see you again before the election in November. Early voting does start September 22nd, and I
Yes.
think that's something that people got to remember to do.
That's right. We got to vote.
Yeah, but the only thing that bothers me about that, once you vote, then you change your mind. Too bad.
Oops.
Oops. So I kind of like to wait till the last day, but to get all the information. But it's great. There's a lot of people traveling and moving around, and there's no excuse now not to vote.
Well, voting's your right.
It
and
is.
it's your civic responsibility.
It is.
And if you don't know who to vote for, read and pay attention to
Amazing.
interviews like this.
I've worked some polls and been there, and people walk up to you, well, who should I vote for? I'm thinking, you're kidding me, on the day of election, you don't know who you're voting for.
But don't you think that has to do with people being very, very busy?
Oh, yes. It does.
And people are extremely busy, and I think that it might be a good time for people to take a breather. I was a little bit disappointed with our response to COVID because everybody kept saying, well, we need to get back to work, need to get back to normal. Well, it's kind of like, maybe we should rethink what normal is. Because people working from home, that was actually good for the community.
Yeah,
People
changed a lot
paid
in the business world.
Well, that was unfortunate,
Yeah.
true. But also having people work from home rather than commute adds to your community.
Yeah.
People pay attention to their
Sure.
neighbors. They pay attention to what goes on in their community.
I thought some of our towns out here missed the boat on that when we could have said, look, we're only an hour away from D.C. We could be a virtual commuter's headquarters. We got broadband, we got this, we got that, we got lifestyle, and it's charming. If you're working from home, Arlington's not the place to be. It didn't catch on, but some did.
Depends on what you want.
I know,
But we
sure.
like it here, I think.
We like it here.
But
It's
here
great.
we have a great variety. I mean, we have Front Royal.
Right.
We have Winchester City. We have Berryville. We have
Right.
cute little towns. We have a larger city. So if you don't have what you want right where you live, it's not a far commute to
you
D.C.
can-
or Front Royal.
And I even tell people we're only 4 hours from New York City,
That's true.
and 2 hours you got 4 major airports. You got Baltimore, Richmond, and Washington D.C. I lived in Tucson for a while, and I lived in the city limits, and it took me almost an hour to get to the airport.
But
so
yes. If you have public transportation that came out here,
That's
then
right.
it would take you less time.
That's right. Yeah, some of those cities out west do not have very good public transportation. But I'm just saying, just because you live in these cities, I know people that live in Springfield or in Arlington. And it takes them longer to get around to the airport than it does from here, and they're only 6 miles away or 8. You know what I mean? So you can't always go by distance.
No, you can't.
So I tell people it's all about the life choice that you make. And
Yeah, well, too, going back to Front Royal, you do have a bus.
we do have a bus. We do have, and a lot of little communities don't. I mean, there's a lot of things in our local area, the Senate District 1 even, that it is really, if we just look at it, there's a lot of opportunities here.
Also, I think that it's important to take into consideration with some of our more agricultural parts of this district, the population's getting older.
Yes.
And some sort of adaptation to that aging population would be a good thing.
Right.
I think that we need, there again, public transportation would be hugely important.
Sure. It goes back to policies, though. People are worried about losing their family farms when their parents or grandparents die off, and then they're taxed to death. They can't keep them. Their kids don't want to do that kind of work.
Well, that's the thing that Republicans like to talk about. They like to talk about inheritance taxes. But inheritance taxes in Virginia aren't terrible. In fact, you can be quite wealthy and not pay inheritance taxes. Right. Now, the last time I checked, you didn't have to pay inheritance taxes on anything under $750,000. That's a nice chunk of change.
Sure.
And quite honestly, there are exceptions for agricultural land. We can actually build in incentives there
Sure.
again to make it easier
Right.
for that sort of thing to happen. And that happens at the state level.
Sure.
That kind of thing is stuff that we can do to make things easier for citizens.
Right.
We represent citizens. We don't represent, like, the government.
Right.
And there again, that's something that people think that Democrats and Republicans, but no, we represent people, and I think sometimes that gets lost in the mix.
does
We don't
get lost.
represent business; we represent citizens.
Right.
And
Good idea. You got to stick with that one.
well, going back to citizenship, that goes back to voting. You have a right to vote. Make sure you exercise that right to vote.
Exactly.
You do. You can change. You can affect change by voting. If you don't like what's going on,
Sure.
go to the voting booth and say,
Yeah.
I'm going to try something different.
I hear people all the time complaining, and I said, "Well, who did you vote for?" "Well, I didn't vote."
I know.
In the discussion,
I know. Well, there again, it goes back to education. Another thing that I'm a fan of is civics.
Yep.
I think that let's go back to teaching civics. We have government, but we have only half a semester. When you and I were in school,
Right, yeah.
it was a full semester of government.
Yeah.
And the more that we know, I think people are afraid of politics. I think
Right.
that the national media makes people think that all it is arguing. But the fact of the matter is politics is every day.
Right.
You have politics in the workplace, politics in your city government, politics in your county government.
It's interesting you mentioned that the way the Virginia Senate and the state work, the Senate and the House works together. They really have to come up with a compromise before that bill gets passed. It's not really something that just happens. It's a lot of work.
Well, we have essentially all of our government in this country is based on the spirit of compromise.
Right.
And a lot of times compromise isn't necessarily what you want, but maybe consensus or maybe an idea that both sides there again haven't thought of in the first place.
Exactly.
But people tend to think that, well, it's just a bunch of squabbling and a bunch of bureaucracy. But actually the Founding Fathers had some intent into building in that bureaucracy because what it keeps radical change from happening.
Right. Quickly.
Exactly. And radical change is not necessarily a good thing. What we need is thoughtful, intelligent change in the public interest.
Right.
That's the way I see it.
Right. That's what someone the other day we were talking about when the government changes the presidents. I said, now the next morning when you woke up, how did your life change? It didn't change at all. So once we get away from Washington D.C., life is different.
Yeah, but I think that the president is sort of a bully pulpit.
It
The
is.
president
it
is an
But it
example.
didn't change the next day. You see,
No, of course
it takes
not.
this time, is what you're saying. There's time. It doesn't happen immediately, and I don't think people realize that they get up in arms. I said, it doesn't change that fast.
And that can be a good thing.
Yes.
Because fast change is what brought us Hitler.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That did happen very quick.
Fast change is what brought us the Iranian government right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to look at history.
Right.
And our area is steeped in history.
Yeah.
We can look at the mistakes of history, but we can also look at the successes.
Yeah. Well, again, Emily, thanks so much for coming
Thank
in.
you.
We will get together here maybe before the election, and we'll try one more time. How's
Great.
that? All right.
It was a pleasure.
Thank
Thank you.
Remember, early voting September 22nd, and if you're not registered, there's still time. And so do that. And the election is on November 7th. Thanks again, Emily.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.